Okay, as I said earlier, we're going to move into conversations. If I can get you back from these conversations. I'm really eager to introduce this process called the World Cafe, but before we do that, I wanted to read to you an email that I received about 2 months ago from a woman in her 60s who I'm so grateful that she relayed this story to me. I'm going to read it to you. And for me, this is all about we never know who people are. We never know what potential is out there. So, this is what she wrote. My son Aaron, who is transgendered and was formerly my daughter Rachel, was recently tasked with managing what has been called a, quote, low barrier shelter for the homeless in Vancouver, British Columbia. The typical homeless shelters in Vancouver have all sorts of rules. You can't come in if you're drunk. You can't bring in your shopping cart that has all your worldly possessions. You can't bring in your dog, your only friend. Once you check in for the night, you can't go outside again without losing your space, etc., etc., etc. Consequently, there has been a significantly large group of people who refuse to come inside for shelter no matter what the weather. Perhaps because Vancouver is hosting the Winter Olympics next year, spending billions on the venues, little on social housing, and needs to look good, politicians want the homeless people off the streets. So power brokers came up with the idea of creating a low barrier shelter, one that be easy to get people into. Funding came through very quickly, and the agency where Aaron works was tasked with opening a space within just a few days. You can imagine if they had tried to write a grant or, do the normal stuff. Aaron, who had been supervising an outreach team on the downtown east side of Vancouver, was given the job of, quote, manager. He told me he decided to hire people because of their values rather than their training and experience. And he hired 17 fairly young people. Some are gay, lesbian, 3 are transgendered, and I'm guessing that most of them have been marginalized in some way or other and have come through all sorts of challenges more or less unscathed, or at least with a pretty good idea of issues related to power. These dear souls opened the shelter with no policies or rules in place because there simply wasn't any time. Shopping carts, dogs and cats are allowed. It's okay to be drunk or high, etc., etc. But this is what I found most encouraging. As problems arose and in the absence of policies, the staff asked the shelter folk, they decided not to call them clients, how they wanted to deal with the issues. The homeless community made decisions, and no surprise, they are playing by their own rules, some of which they graffiti on the walls of the place. They have sorted out how to deal with violent behavior, how to keep the neighboring businesses, the shelters in an industrial area, how to keep those businesses happy, how to keep the place clean, how to deal with food issues, how to protect the more vulnerable of their group, etc., etc. It all works pretty well and it seems fair. As a group of people who were not willing to play by imposed rules and who were able to stay alive in pretty desperate circumstances, it's not surprising that they exhibit a sense of community that was no doubt already in existence on the streets, but how wonderful that the two systems were able to merge. A few weeks ago, my son organized a staff training session and asked me to come do an appreciative inquiry with the staff. I did, and they were 17 of the most amazing folks I have met in my 60-plus years on the planet. I guess that because of their own life experiences, they are acutely aware of issues related to power. Their motto is, "We say yes." They have had no leadership training, yet they know intuitively what it has taken me a good part of my life to learn. I think this is a remarkable and familiar story at the same time of when you really push away, refuse to just see people for the box that they've been put in, or that they've even put themselves in. That we never know who's going to step forward and what wisdom they already have that they're now willing to use for something they really care about. So I'm now going to pull up PowerPoint if I can. Okay, all right. So we're onto my computer. Just give me a moment here. I really want to focus our conversations, at least in the beginning, to really explore your own experience with being surprised by people who showed up. And we're going to use this process called the World Cafe. If we get it was there a minute ago, wasn't it? Okay, well, I'm just going to talk about World Cafe, and you want to fuss with this? The World Cafe, you can learn about this process and read stories of how people are using it around the world. It's been in existence for about 10 years. It was just sort of discovered as a way to have very large groups of people. I mean, the largest World Cafe was 2,100 people in Thailand, but all working in small groups of 4 or 5. And working with the image that if we keep circulating from group to group, we're all talking about the same topic or question, but we keep changing who we're talking with. And so we get into exponential possibilities here, because first you'll talk with a group of 4 other people, but then after 20 minutes we're going to switch to another group that has 4 new people in it. Each of those people has just spoken with 4 people. And then for the 3rd time, we'll switch and you'll talk with entirely new people, and then you're talking with 4 new people who talked with 4 new people who talked with 4 new people. What happens in this kind of networked, what becomes available is we start to realize we know what everyone's talking about. Thank you. Okay, we'll see if this works. That we learn what's going on in the whole group, no matter how large it is. So one of the concerns I keep hearing from people is, well, we don't, okay, just put it on PowerPoint, and okay, there it is. Okay, we're going to rock and roll here. People say, well, we really need to talk, but, the group's too large. Or we create these, I'm just going to talk for a second about town meeting formats. As we're seeing, what they create is absolutely predictable. If you create a format like a school board meeting or a town council meeting or now these town hall meetings where people want airtime, but they don't really expect to listen to each other. They just want to use their moment in the media sun to make their case. So people, you could predict this would happen. Get dramatic, get aggressive, get nasty, get theatrical, all to get attention. The World Cafe is an entirely different process. It says that if people can come together and listen to each other, then we can really discover the insights and the solutions we need. Because the solutions we need, the wisdom we need, is already in us. We just need the right process for bringing it out. And for me, that process has to be conversation. And what I love about this drawing from one of the World Cafe artists is it shows both the global nature and the diversity that's available in a small group conversation. Conversation is the way that human beings have always thought together. And we got way off track by creating these very elaborate processes and techniques. But there has never been a human tribe discovered that is silent. Okay, we are a language expressive species. And Humberto Maturana, who's a Chilean biologist, has a book out called The Biology of Love, in which he posits that we developed language as a species when we moved into family groups because we wanted to get to know each other better. You know, so we are naturally curious. We're natural storytellers. We're always trying to find meaning in life. And conversation is the way we've done that. You know, the oldest example of groups sitting in circle is 150,000 years old. Not even Homo sapiens, it's Homo erectus, the species that discovered fire. And the thing about the circle, it's very clear that if you were sitting around a fire in a rectangle, some people would freeze. So the circle is the form of equality. Everyone is equidistant. And it's also the form used in so many cultures throughout the world. So it's not Western at all. I mean, we'd rather have a meeting and a flip chart and a microphone. But what a good conversation circle does is it invites in people from many different cultures, because it's intrinsic to the human condition to want to talk and to talk as equals. And so this is, when you're dealing with populations where there's a lot of ethnic diversity and cultural diversity, the circle is the form that invites in everyone. And it is the form of equality, and one last thing, it's the form that cools things down. If you're sitting in a circle and you start screaming at somebody, you actually feel pretty stupid. It's amazing, you know, it's the form of wholeness, right? It's the form of completion. It's the wheel of life. And so it really has a power. And it's very important that you really use it as a form so that you don't let it get to be an amoeba shape, you know, or some people come in late and they say, well, no, I'll just sit in the back. And the way that I always check whether it's a circle is I just ask people, can you see each other? And then people, you know, move their chairs back or forward. But if you're hosting a circle, you really have to watch that the shape stays, because people start to push back or move forward or whatever. And it is the shape of peaceful behavior. So I just offer that. If you're interested in how conversation and how circles being used, I have a website that's dedicated to this called turningtoOneAnother.net, based on the book title. So I really encourage you to explore that if it fits your needs. But if you're dealing with a community where you have multiple cultures, multiple ages, and you have a big problem that's very fraught with anger or anxiety, then using the circle is the perfect use of it. And if it's a group larger than 20, I'd say then you switch to this World Cafe process, where we're going to meet in groups of 4 or 5, but we're gradually going to learn what everyone is talking about. The website for the World Cafe is a rich resource. There's also a book out called The World Cafe. So here are some of the rules for how to be in this process. It's really good to go for diversity here because you'll learn more and it'll be more interesting. So one rule of thumb is just find people who don't look like you. Okay? And a second way is how we participate in these conversations. It's very enriching if you try and listen to learn from somebody. And I think the simplest way to do that is to expect to hear something different, a different point of view, a different thought than your own. And this is not how we usually listen in groups. One of my colleagues, Parker Palmer, tried an experiment where he just asked us not to nod our heads in agreement. You can't imagine, well, you probably can, how difficult this is. I mean, you know, we've been taught to be empathic listeners and to encourage people, and so we nod and we nod. But what happens in most groups is the minute somebody says something you disagree with, you disconnect from them. So we're listening for agreement, we're listening for friends and for allies, and this is not productive. And what's especially not productive is that when somebody says something new and different that we disagree with, we stop listening to them and we start to formulate an argument in our head. And then when we talk, we're actually just trying to convince them. So listening for difference is a much more relaxing process. And the way that it relaxes us is that you expect that this is a person who has a different life experience than you, different age, different ethnicity, all those differences. Of course they're going to think differently than you. And actually, if you listen respectfully to anybody, even if you disagree with them, you move closer together. I had a t-shirt from a social work conference that was given to me years ago, and it just said, "You don't hate someone whose story you know." Listening always brings us closer together. So this is just a little tip on how to be a good listener. Expect to hear something different, and don't look for commonalities. And this is all self-facilitated. You don't rely on anybody except yourself to make this a meaningful exercise. And therefore, if you don't like what's going on, it's up to you to change it. I accept no complaints, okay? If the conversation starts to become meaningless to you, then you have to decide whether you're going to change the conversation. So this is how we're going to start. In a moment, I'm going to ask you to get away from these tables, actually, because they're too big. We've got a lot of space here and all through here and maybe over here. And I would just ask you to cluster in groups of 4. And nothing larger, because we won't have time for everyone to talk if they're larger. We're going to have a conversation for 20 minutes. We're all going to be in the same question, but in our own small groups. And I need to give you a signal. Wait, before you stand up. In my effort to bring you back peacefully without me standing up here trying to get your attention, I'm going to introduce this process that may be familiar to you from childhood. When I raise my hand, we're going to create some agreements here. This is the agreement. When I raise my hand, it's my effort to call you back. So you need to agree you will do 2 things when you see my hand up. First agreement is you will stop talking. And second agreement is then you will raise your hand. Okay. Both of those are important. You don't raise your hand but keep talking. Or you just, ignore me and just keep talking, and don't even try and raise your hand. But here's where it's a great example of self-coordinated behaviors. We know what the rules are, but you each decide when you're going to implement them. So that's there's an actual science to this. It's not just a Girl Scout trick. Okay? So I would like to give you the question for the first conversation. Then we'll have 20 minutes, and also then if you would after I give you the question, go find all the people who look different than you but no more than 3 other people, and just get away from these tables and make sure you're sitting in a circle, which is easy with 4 people. And there may be 1 or 2 groups with 5, but please keep it to 4 if you can. So I introduced this question at the very beginning, saying it's a very popular phrase in America. But for the work that you do in the communities where you are located, I would really like you to explore whether people feel like they're all in the same boat. And another variation of that is, how would you define the boat that you're all in? Okay? I've never tried this question, so I'm really interested in where it leads you. And if it doesn't work, you'll talk about whatever you damn well want to talk about. You know, that's who people are. So, okay, now it's time for you to self-organize yourselves into groups of 4 with people who don't look quite like you, and use all this beautiful space we have, please. Okay. How'd this go? Did you stay with the question, or where did it end up? Yeah? And was that useful to see if people in your community recognize we're all in the same boat, or some group? As I said, it's the first time I've used that question, so I am a little intrigued by whether it was useful or not. But let's look at your own behavior here. How'd you do in listening for difference? Remember that little bit I put in? Yes, okay. We're going to have 2 more rounds of conversations, so being curious and open and appreciative of different points of view is the basic principle here. But it's also a way to make you a good listener. You know, not just listening to find your friends. Okay. We're not on Facebook here. This is about really learning from each other and seeing that our diverse perspectives are actually what we need in order to develop a bigger picture, a more fuller understanding of what's going on in whatever part of the community we're working in. So diversity for me is a survival skill these days. It's not, just something we value or celebrate as we should, but it's really how we learn more about what's going on, because there's a wonderful quote from a British advertisement that a different point of view comes from a place where you are not. So here we have the opportunity that even though you're engaged in similar work, to really learn what else is going on in the world, in the community that might be valuable for you. Okay, so what we're going to do now is move on. Don't move yet. Okay, just sit still for a second. We're going to move on, and you will now find 3 or 4 new people that you haven't yet talked with. So whoever's in this group right now, you're not going to see him again. Okay? So you're going to go find 3 or 4 other people. However, one person from these little groupings gets to stay. And that person becomes the host for the new people who will come to the group. Now, if you could quickly choose who wants to not move, usually it's the person who's most tired. So it's a real easy role. So if you could just quickly choose who will stay, that's the host for the next group. Okay, so here's, if I can talk to the hosts for a moment. No, sit there. Oh, no. All right, folks, I'm going to put my hand up again, I could tell. Here's what the host does. The host welcomes the new people, does not tell everything that was talked about, okay? Does not give a report out. Do not allow this to happen. Those of you who are coming to the new circles. What the host does is welcomes you and then begins the conversation by speaking about something that was said in this group that the host found of interest. So you get to speak first and you get to speak personally. You do not have to represent the whole group. It's just your personal experience, okay? So if you come to a group and the person as host starts to give a report out, that's where you have to facilitate yourselves and just say, no, thank you. Okay. So the next question, before you move, I'd like to explain this question, is going back to this slide. What bundles of potential are out there in our community behind the stereotypes and judgments? This is just a conversation around who might surprise you if you were to just shift your lens of who was there. So this is a way of sort of starting to tune into, so who might be out there in our community, just as these homeless folks became a great resource. And it's also a way of just starting to talk about judgments and stereotypes that are really prevalent in your own community. Is that clear enough? This, you can take this in many different directions, but I'd actually like you to start to inquire about who might be out there if we were just to push aside the judgments and stereotypes of them. Okay? So go find the host stay. Now go find 3 or 4 new people. Sense of perspective or insight or clarity or any of that, or are you just having a nice time yammering to each other? How's the difference thing going? At this point, it may be moot. I mean, it may not be relevant because now you're in more earnest conversations, but it's just something to keep track of how you are listening. We're going to do one final round before we try and harvest some of the learnings that may have become apparent. And this next question is really directed to you personally and how you take any of your learning or open-heartedness out back to your group and your community. So the question is, speaking very specifically of people that you work with, people that in your community, people who you have some relationship with, who might you invite into the boat? Seemingly now you have defined the boat that you're all in. So that's one part of this conversation is, so who else needs to come into the boat? Who would you invite in now? But another way to look at this is, who are you now willing to be curious about? Now, think about this in a totally Christian way, okay? The person you might decide to become curious about might be the person who's really driving you crazy right now. So instead of being driven crazy, instead of having all your opinions and judgments about how bad this person is, you might decide going forward, okay, I'm just going to drop those judgments and become a little curious here. What does motivate that bastard? Or you can word it however gets, opens you up. But the possibility here is that instead of being locked into a judgment about someone as not worthy or not in your boat or stupid or not caring, that you might be, if you became curious about them, it might be the beginning of a change. Right? So the gist of both of these questions, they're related, but you could work with them again, however really fits you. But to think about who else needs to come into your boat, who you might invite in, and then it might be this person that you develop some curiosity about. Is that clear enough? Because the intent here is to open and to even think about people that you might have pushed aside or that you have such strong judgment about that you don't want even to talk to them. And instead, this is kind of a softening and an opening of your own curiosity towards that person, okay? So Same host. How'd the host do? Did they avoid report outs? Again, the host welcomes the new group and begins to talk first only about one thing that really struck them or impressed or affected them in this conversation. So again, those of you who are moving, please go find 3 or 4 people that you have not yet talked with in this cafe today. So make yourself comfortable. We're going to be here for about 15 minutes, so y'all settled? So I'd like to do 2 things. I'd like to actually talk about what you might have learned about this process, and then what you might have learned as a result of the process, what kinds of personal insights or thoughts or issues became a little bit clearer. So let's first actually talk about what came out of using a conversational process like this. So what sort of comments, insights, whatever, would you like to share with me? Just if you had an insight or if you saw something more clearly, or yes?
Well, the first kind of tricky part that I found about it was trying to find somebody that didn't look like me. I didn't really know what that meant, if that was like a physical thing or, and so.
It's meant to be vague.
Yeah, so I sort of ended up sitting with a group of women, but found out that we were all very, very different, like very and a lot of different opinions.
A lot of different opinions, perspectives, good.
So you can't say that.
Yeah, well, you can interpret it any way you want to, and sometimes people ignore it. So, it's just a little ambiguity that hopefully led someplace. Even better if you are sitting with people who look like you and you discover you're all different. That's a nice thing to discover, yeah. But what about sort of insights about your community, who's in your community, who you might start to be curious about, or yes? I don't think anyone can hear you down there. No, sorry.
What I learned when I really tried to focus on diversity and finding the diversity in the group is we kept putting back in the same boat.
Okay, I think you need to say this. It sounds really intriguing, and I don't think everyone can hear it yet.
Okay. The more I focused on finding the diversity in the group and the farther out people went in their diversity, the more we ended up in exactly the same boat. That, there are similarities in all of us and things that we can learn from each other and balances that we can find in our experiences that basically put us all back in the same boat.
Thank you. Other comments about what you might have discovered or noticed?
Throughout the different groups that we had rural and more urban, and between the both of them, we all had the same situations that we were still dealing with, and I felt like we were able to share some new thoughts and new ideas to bring back to our own communities, because some of us weren't just from Missoula. So that was, for me, that was pretty good, inspiring. I think everyone was more or less forced to talk because of the small group, which really made a better sharing.
Yeah. Someone from over here. Yes.
I think back to the process question that you asked, how the process was. I think the last group that we were in, there were folks who really wanted the process to have kept the same question throughout, so they could hear.
Yes, you can do that also.
Yeah. That did come up. So
Okay. If you're good.
the first and the third question kind of did that, kind of tied you back. So.
In some of the conversations that I was engaged in,
Oh, yeah, theoretical is always easier than personal. Yes, yeah. But you know, the other thing about using a conversational process is if you give it time, people get past their fear and become more open and speak more truthfully. The first conversation in a group is always going to be defended. You know, we're going to be uncertain about how much to share or who else is in here, who can I trust. And that's what one of the beauties of this process is, that even though we continue to have conversations with different people, each conversation, I don't know if you saw this, but often we're just a little more open and a little more curious, and they get deeper and deeper. And in a number of times when I've run World Cafes, by the last conversation, the room is actually quite quiet. Like there's a real focus, and people are just more present for each other. So I don't know if you felt that, but conversation takes time. It's like a spiral that goes deeper and deeper as we learn to trust the people and to trust the process as well. So you never start out as truthful and honest as you hope, and that's fine. You know, it's gradual. Anyone else have any comments about anything you discovered? Yeah, if you just stand up, please.
I came in late, but the group I was in, the first group was Bonnie's, and what I heard said was it was interesting to hear the moderator give a glimpse of something from the question before and how differently their group had, or the direction was so different from how their group had gone with that question.
Right, right. If nothing else, I hope you have noticed the value, or let's say, that of course this is going to happen. You give everyone the same question, and we're all going to take it in a different direction based on what we need to talk about and who we are. So it's another case to be made for the value of diversity. You know, we never hear the same thing, even though we're present at the same event. We never take the same question the same way. And it's those differences that actually enrich us. Not that, well, you didn't follow the rules, you didn't color in the lines. It's no, this is a wonderful way to actually develop a rich diversity of interpretations and insights. So I want to just ask you to notice about the process itself. And if you're intrigued, as I said, go to their website, theworldcafe.com. You'd be amazed at how much is there. But I'd like you to think for a moment, we're in 3 different groups. Of those 3 conversations, which would you say was the best for you? And don't name them, because then you'll offend the other people. But which was the richest for you? And now I'd like you to think about what conditions were present that made that conversation so good, or best among 3. Because if you really start to notice what led to a good conversation, then you can take that learning back home with you. So whether it was the way people were respectful, or the quality of people's listening, or that it was the right question, or that it was the right question for you, but really think about what made that conversation work. Because you can generalize that now. And when you're designing other conversations, you can use this learning. Yes?
So, I love everybody in the first group I was with. When I finally came down to the third group, I had a question and a thought, and I found a solution for it. Where I didn't probably ask it the right way in the first group. But at the third,
Or it may have taken 3 groups to get there. Yeah, and that's the value also of realizing these things take time to emerge, and it won't happen in the first group usually. Okay, so now that you thought of the 3 conversations, the group that was the best, now you think about if any one of them didn't quite gel, it didn't quite get off the ground. What was going on there that made it problematic? And again, look at, how people listened, the respect, the trust level, but also whether the question was just off, not quite meaningful to you. And again, I'm just asking you to reflect on your experience, because if you do this, you will learn a lot about how to host a good conversation. And that's the real point here, that you carry this forward. Yes?
Could you pop the 3 questions up again?
I couldn't now. I'm on a totally different screen. But the questions were, if you can all help me. What boat are we all in? Really trying to identify that. What was the second one? That was the third. No, that was the second. Well, that was this. No. That's right. Who are the bundles? Yes. What other potentials there? And then who would you invite into your boat, and who could you become curious about? Yeah. Okay, we're going to close, in a few minutes. But are there any other comments or learnings?
Yeah, I think what I've found out is that what you're trying to do is help us eliminate our prejudice.
Eliminate our prejudices? Yeah, I think that's true. And I have to say that for me, this is, when I said that Muhammad Yunus said that, poverty is a concept we lay on people, all of our judgments are just that. They're concepts we lay on each other. And yet when you're working as hard as you're all working, and you're under stress, and you're feeling overwhelmed and exhausted, or maybe you're not. Are you? I mean, anyone who's trying to do good work for society these days is truly exhausted and overwhelmed. And you're asked to do more and more with less and less, faster and faster, right? It's so easy to get caught up in our stereotypes and judgments because we don't have time to get to know the person. So, this quote I introduced, that you don't hate someone whose story you know. We always come closer together and see each other more clearly if we have time for a conversation. But we don't have time for those conversations. So what's really happening is we are, in our franticness and our overwhelmedness, we are getting stuck in our judgments more and more, simply because we don't have time. And yet in every organization I've ever worked in where we've made the time to just stop and listen to each other for a few minutes, it changes the whole tenor of our relationships. And it's especially important for all of you, this is my final parting advice, to occasionally be in conversations with each other about why you're in this work. What is your deepest sense of purpose for staying in this struggle? You're not leaving. You're working harder than ever. You showed up for this conference. So together here and with colleagues back home, it's really important to remember what motivated you at that deepest level of wanting to serve, wanting to help others, wanting to do good with your life, caring about kids, caring about families. It's important to have those conversations because you will be stunned by some of the stories you tell each other. And it's very, very motivating, and it's very grounding, and those are both things we need more of. We need to stay grounded in the midst of all this craziness, and we need to stay energized for the work. And I find the easiest way to do that is periodically just relax a little bit, have a beer, I don't care where you do this, but so why are we in this work? Why are we persevering? Why are we willing to put up with all this nonsense? Why did I come into this kind of work? Just have those conversations and you'll be delighted by the outcome of that. I'm going to close by playing another part of the DVD. Is that a good thing?
Este tema para todo el mundo, for all the world, for peace and for love.
Please don't worry, my brother, in this world we are all the same. We must find peace, we must find it together. We start far away from your heart. You've got the good vibration.
Let your heart follow the rhythm when the voice gives you emotion. You have to feel peace when the butterfly dances in the sky. When you want to sing what you like, you've got the good sensation. You've got the good sensation. You've got the good vibration. You've got the good vibration.
Let's don't worry, my brother. In this world, we're all the same. We must find peace. We must find it together. It's not far away from your heart. You got the good vibration, vibration, vibration. You got the good vibration. You got the good vibration. Naso son kiskati. Naso son kiskati. Naso son kiskati.
Yes. So just think, there's a whole wide world full of people out there who, like each of us, really wants things to change. And we each do it in our individual way, but we really are all part of this great yearning. I mean, I speak because I travel so widely. Such a great yearning in people to come together and to really create change in the midst of very difficult times. And that really is when the human spirit, when we are at our best. Given a big challenge, wide open space to contribute, just go back into your communities and see who's there that you didn't know was there. So thank you very much for this time together.